The Weight of Silent Laughter. Ethan's world had always been vibrant and full of sound. Laughter echoed in his home, filling every corner with warmth and life. But tragedy, as it often does, came uninvited, tearing through his family like a storm. First, his father passed away unexpectedly due to a heart attack. The man who had taught him how to tie his shoes and face the world with courage was suddenly gone. Ethan could still hear his father's hearty laugh in his mind, but it felt like a cruel echo of something he could never have again. Just a year later, his mother succumbed to an aggressive illness. She had been the pillar of their family, the one who held them together through every hardship. Losing her left, Ethan feeling like a ship adrift in a stormy sea. His younger sister, Lily, was his last source of solace. Lily had a spirit that could brighten even the darkest days. She would tease Ethan, call him her grumpy big brother, and insist he smile more often. But fate had one more cruel twist in store. A car accident claimed Lily's life, leaving Ethan utterly broken. 3 losses in 3 years. How could anyone bear such a weight? After Lily's death, Ethan stopped smiling altogether. He told himself it was out of respect for his family, but deep down it was guilt. He felt that to laugh or smile was to betray their memory. How can I be happy when they're not here? He would think. So he withdrew from the world, avoiding people and situations that might bring him joy. Ethan's friends tried to reach out, but their efforts were met with silence. I just need time, he would tell them, though he didn't believe it himself. Days turned into weeks, then months. He went to work, came home, and repeated the cycle, numbing himself to the passage of time. His small apartment became a sanctuary of isolation. The only decorations were a few framed family photos, which he couldn't bring himself to take down. Each one seemed to stare at him, as if asking, "Why aren't you living?" One evening, while cleaning out a drawer, Ethan found an old family photo album. Dust clung to its cover, and its edges were frayed, but it was unmistakably a piece of his past. Hesitant, he opened it and began flipping through the pages. The photos were a time capsule of happier days. There was his father, grinning proudly next to a freshly built treehouse, his mother, laughing as she tried to balance a tray of cookies, and Lily, sticking out her tongue in nearly every picture. Toward the back of the album, Ethan found something unexpected. It was a handwritten note tucked between the pages. The handwriting was unmistakably Lily's, messy but full of energy. The note read, "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you're looking back at the good times. Don't forget to laugh, because it's what keeps us alive in each other's hearts." Ethan's hands trembled as he read the words. Tears streamed down his face, but for the first time in years, they weren't just tears of sadness. That note planted a small seed of change in Ethan's heart. He began to wonder if his refusal to laugh was really honoring his family. Maybe I've been wrong all this time, he thought. But change didn't come overnight. It started with small steps, like going for walks in the park or sitting in a cafe instead of eating alone at home. One day, an old friend named Mark reached out. Mark had been persistent, refusing to let Ethan drift away completely. There's a community theater group starting up, Mark said. You should join. Theater? Me? Ethan laughed bitterly. I'm not exactly in a laughing mood. That's exactly why you need it, Mark replied. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed to attend a rehearsal. The theater was a modest space, filled with mismatched chairs and a stage that creaked underfoot. The group was small but lively, full of people who welcomed Ethan with open arms. At first, he stayed in the background, helping with props and lighting. But as weeks passed, he found himself drawn into the energy of the group. One evening, during a chaotic rehearsal, everything went hilariously wrong. Lines were forgotten, props broke, and someone accidentally spilled a drink on the stage. To Ethan's surprise, he laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. It felt like a dam breaking, releasing years of pent up emotion. The group noticed, and their smiles encouraged him further. After that rehearsal, Ethan felt different. The weight of grief was still there, but for the first time, he allowed himself to experience a little joy. He continued attending the theater group, even though he felt out of place at times. It wasn't until he met Claire that things began to truly shift. Claire was a woman in her 30s, warm and confident, with a quick wit and a compassionate heart. She noticed Ethan's struggle almost immediately. You're carrying something heavy, she said one evening after a particularly emotional scene. Ethan hesitated, unsure how to respond, but Claire was persistent. You don't have to carry it alone, she added gently. Slowly, Claire and Ethan became friends. She would invite him to lunch after rehearsals, and they would talk about everything, except for the pain Ethan refused to confront. But Claire wasn't easily deterred. Sometimes we think we're honoring the people we've lost by staying sad. But in reality, they would want us to live, to be happy, she said one day. Ethan was skeptical, but appreciated her honesty. Over time, he began to open up, little by little. He shared stories about his family, about his father's love for fishing, his mother's incredible cooking, and how Lily always managed to make him laugh, even when he was feeling down. Claire listened intently, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like his grief was a burden. He felt lighter after every conversation with her, as if her words were slowly lifting the weight from his chest. But the turning point came during the theater group's first public performance. Ethan was nervous, standing backstage in his costume, the lights blinding and the audience beyond the curtains. The nerves he'd felt before now felt different, tinged with excitement. He had a small role, a comedic one, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to truly put himself out there. You can do it, Claire whispered, offering a reassuring smile. Ethan stepped onto the stage, and for the first time in years, he forgot about his grief. He lost himself in the performance, becoming the character rather than the man weighed down by loss. The audience laughed, genuine, wholehearted laughter. Ethan felt something stir in his chest, something that had been dormant for so long. It was the feeling of connection, of being alive in the moment. When the curtain fell, Ethan didn't feel empty. He felt full. After the performance, the cast celebrated at a local diner. Laughter filled the room, and Ethan joined in, his laugh not forced, but natural. He realized that in that moment, he wasn't betraying his family's memory by laughing. He was honoring it. His family had always loved life, and they had wanted him to love it too. He didn't have to give up happiness to carry their memory. Instead, he could let their memory be a part of his joy. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a different perspective. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt when he smiled. He remembered Lily's note, and he thought about how she had urged him to laugh. "I'm living for you too," he whispered to himself. In the days that followed, Ethan continued to grow. He spent more time with friends, and he found himself more open to the world. He started volunteering at a local shelter, offering his help to those who needed it most. His heart began to heal, not because the pain went away, but because he had learned how to carry it alongside the joy. Slowly, Ethan's life transformed. He began to smile more often, and his laughter returned, genuine, full, and free. People noticed. His friends commented on how much lighter he seemed, how his presence brightened the room. Ethan still visited his family's grave on the anniversaries of their deaths, but instead of mourning alone, he would bring flowers and share stories about their best memories. He would laugh when he remembered the silly things his father had done, the way his mother would sing off key in the kitchen, or how Lily had a laugh that was infectious. In those moments, Ethan realized that laughter wasn't a sign of forgetting. It was a way of keeping them alive in his heart. One day, while walking through the park, Ethan met an elderly man who was sitting alone on a bench. The man had a kind face but seemed lost in thought. Ethan sat beside him and struck up a conversation. They talked about the weather, about the park, and eventually about life and loss. The elderly man smiled at Ethan and said, "You know, son, laughter is the best way to honor those we've lost. It reminds us that they're still with us." Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of understanding. "I've learned that," he said softly, and with that, they both laughed, a quiet, shared understanding passing between them. As time went on, Ethan found himself more involved in his community. He helped organize charity events, volunteered at local schools, and even began coaching a youth theater group. His life, once filled with shadows, now glowed with the light of purpose. Through his work with the theater, he met many people who had faced their own struggles, and he shared his story with them. Some were grieving, some were lost, but they all seemed to find comfort in his words. Ethan didn't have all the answers, but he had learned that healing didn't come from avoiding pain, it came from embracing it. He learned that life could be both beautiful and heartbreaking, and that both could coexist. The theater group grew to be a second family for Ethan. They celebrated milestones together, birthdays, anniversaries, and achievements, but they also supported one another through the hard times. On the anniversaries of his family's passing, Ethan still took a moment to remember them. He would visit their graves with a bouquet of flowers, but instead of tears, he'd offer a silent smile. "I'm doing all right," he'd say to himself. "I'm living for all of us." One day, during a rehearsal, Ethan was given the lead role in a play about loss and healing. The role was a reflection of his own journey, and he poured his heart into it. The performance was moving, not just because of the script, but because of the emotions Ethan had transformed into art. As he stood on stage, delivering his final lines, he realized that he had truly come full circle. He was no longer the man who had lost his smile. He was the man who had learned to find joy in the midst of pain. When the curtain fell, the applause felt different than before. It wasn't just for his acting, it was for his resilience, for his courage in choosing to live fully. The theater group surrounded him, clapping and cheering. Claire, who had been his greatest supporter, hugged him tightly. "You did it," she whispered. Ethan smiled, and this time it was without hesitation. For the first time in years, he felt complete. He wasn't carrying the weight of grief alone anymore. Instead, he had learned to walk with it, to laugh and live despite it. That evening, as he sat in his quiet apartment, Ethan thought back on his journey. He thought about the dark days when he had believed that happiness was a betrayal, and he thought about how far he had come since then. He had rediscovered his smile, not because life had become perfect, but because he had learned to embrace its imperfection. The love and memories of his family would always be with him. They lived on in his laughter, in his kindness, and in the way he chose to honor them by living fully. Ethan no longer felt guilty for smiling. He knew that his family would want him to be happy, to find peace in the midst of sorrow. And so he smiled, genuinely, freely, and without regret. The weight of grief still lingered, but it no longer defined him. He was more than his pain. He was a man who had learned to live again, and in that he found true healing. As the years passed, Ethan continued to grow. He fell in love with someone who understood his journey, a woman named Anna, whose kindness mirrored his own. Together, they built a life filled with laughter, love, and new memories. They traveled, they laughed, and they cherished the quiet moments just as much as the big adventures. Ethan never forgot his family, but he no longer let their absence overshadow his life. He carried them with him, not in sorrow, but in celebration. One day, while walking through the park, Ethan saw a young boy sitting alone on a bench, looking lost. Ethan sat beside him and struck up a conversation, just as he had with the elderly man years ago. The boy, whose name was Sam, shared that he had recently lost his mother. Ethan listened intently, understanding the pain in the boy's eyes. After a long silence, Ethan spoke softly. "I know it hurts," he said, "but life goes on. You carry them with you, and that's how you keep them alive." The boy looked up at him, his expression softening. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because I've learned to live," Ethan replied. Sam smiled faintly, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. It was a moment of connection, one that Ethan had longed for when he was younger, and it gave him peace. He knew that his own journey had helped someone else find their way. As he continued his walk home, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. He had come to understand that life wasn't about avoiding pain or grief. It was about living fully despite the hardships. He had learned to laugh again, to smile with his whole heart, and to honor the memories of those he loved. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer had the power to hold him back. He was free, free to laugh, free to love, and free to live. And in that freedom, he found joy once more. Ethan looked up at the sky, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. "Thank you," he whispered to the memory of his family. "I'm living for all of us." And with that, he took another step forward. The journey was never easy, but it had led him to a place of peace, a place where laughter was no longer a burden, but a gift, where memories were cherished and the future was full of possibility. Ethan had finally found his way back to himself. He had learned that true healing came from embracing both the good and the bad, and in that acceptance, he found his smile once more. It was a smile that came not from forgetting, but from remembering with love. A smile that was his own, but shared with those who had shaped him. A smile that was filled with both sorrow and joy. And with that smile, Ethan embraced life once again.